Hey there, maybe you've heard of Bob the Builder. Well, I'm Rob the Builder, and you're watching the third episode of my home studio build series. I'm in the workshop adjacent to the studio, and in this episode I'll cover the state of the basement before the build, the problem of mold and mildew, what I did for the studio floor, and how I solved the mildew problem, and lastly, a new wall, a new door, and a new room. Lucky for me, the difficulty level of this build was much lower than I thought it would be. Anyone with intermediate carpentry skills could easily do what I did here. I hope you'll stick around to learn more. When we moved into the house, roughly one half of the basement was finished. This space in the center of the basement was enclosed by walls on all sides that used wood paneling, painted white. The prior owners constructed these walls to stand a couple of inches away from the foundation. That was a good thing. However, they had also inserted styrofoam between the walls and the concrete. I wondered why, so I looked into it. I guess that back in the 70s, some thought this would help with insulation. It doesn't. It actually promotes the growth of mold and mildew. So I did my best to remove the styrofoam. The finished space of the basement was also carpeted with an off-white, dingy-looking Berber type of fabric. Worse than that, a mildewy smell wafted through the air. Fluorescent lights that emitted an annoying hum illuminated the room with a glaring bright light. And they were mounted alongside the ugly tiles of a hanging ceiling from which debris and flakes occasionally fell. One day I just got so frustrated I tore it all down, leaving an open ceiling with nails coming through the floorboards above, pipes exposed, and wires running here and there. I left it that way for a couple of years, but finally got around to replacing the carpet in the hopes that my mildew problem would be resolved. Sure was wrong about that one. The mildew smell came back on humid summer days, but I got a dehumidifier and that seemed to help. When I decided to create a basement studio, I thought I could keep the carpet. But then, after a lot of research, I came to the conclusion that this would be a bad idea. Now, while I didn't have a problem with flooding or water coming into the basement, I learned that water vapor will inevitably enter through the foundation, and that sealants just aren't good at keeping it out. In fact, the prior owner had put a sealant down on the concrete under the original carpet, and when I pulled it up, I saw that the sealant had actually been flaking off, and there were signs of moisture as well. So much for that idea. So, what was I to do? How could I prevent water vapor from leading to mold and mildew in my studio? Rather than fighting it, I learned that it might be better to let the vapor escape naturally into the basement, and that I could use a very cool product to lift the floor off of the concrete. The answer for me was a product called DMX One Step. What it is are rolls of plastic that are 3.5 feet wide by 29 feet long. A single roll covers 100 square feet. The cool thing about this product, what makes it work, are the small dimples on the underside which raise the plastic off the ground about 1/4 inch or so. By providing an airspace between the concrete and the flooring above, the moisture passing through the foundation is allowed to escape rather than being trapped, as it would be if you placed a carpet, plywood, or OSB subfloor in direct contact with the concrete. Installation was very easy, and it only took me a couple of hours to complete. The one thing you need to do is to leave about 1/4 inch space around the perimeter of the room where the product would normally meet the wall. This is where the moisture escapes. Later on, I installed wall trim to hide this gap, more or less. I found DMX One Step to be a great product and would highly recommend it for any basement project you have in mind. I chose to install vinyl laminate flooring on top of the DMX One subfloor. I purchased a product called LifeProof Rigid Core Luxury Vinyl Flooring from Home Depot. It too was fairly easy to install. All I had to do was drop the planks into place, snap them together at the long sides, and tap the opposing edges with the rubber mallet to tighten it all up. There were a few places where I need to cut the planks to fit at the room's edges, but that was fairly easy to do with the jigsaw. I need to leave a open space at the wall's edges to let the water vapor escape, just as I had done with the DMX-1 installed below it. This flooring is treated to inhibit mold and mildew growth, an important feature for me. As for the look of it, it's obviously manufactured, but I'm okay with it. It's been easy to clean so far and seems to be fairly durable, though I did have one place where the surface was torn, so it's probably a good idea to hold aside a couple of spare planks for replacements. A hard surface flooring will, of course, influence the sound of the room. I'll speak more about this in episode 5 on Taming the Room Sound. Before I decided to create a new room in the basement, I had considered creating lightweight movable walls. I thought this might be cheaper, easier, and faster to construct. But when I thought about it, I realized this would be impractical because it would have to be heavy if I wanted it to also be durable. I abandoned this idea and came to the conclusion that it would be wiser to construct a permanent wall. With that decision made, I went on to design a wall that would enclose the space I had designated for my studio in the basement. I had to work within some constraints, but these turned out to work for me, in my favor. The space in which I would construct the new wall had existing walls on either end that would run perpendicular to the new wall. To ensure a strong anchor for the new wall, I first installed 2x4s on the outside of the wood paneling of the existing walls. Then I drove screws through the studs of the new walls into the anchor studs on the other side of the paneling. This proved to be very strong. So, that's how I attached the new wall to the existing walls. Let's talk about how I dealt with the ceiling. Fortunately, a soffit runs the length of the ceiling, and it encloses a load-bearing beam that runs the length of the foundation. Additionally, a pole stands about halfway between the two walls in the previously finished space. Therefore, I would actually have to construct 2 walls, one for each side of the pole. In order to attach the new walls to the ceiling, I drove screws through their top plates and into the soffit above. Finally, I drove screws through the studs of the new wall into the furring strips which I attached to the center pole. Normally, you'd build the wall to make direct contact with the floor using pressure-treated wood in the bottom plate of the wall in order to resist the vapor venting through the foundation. However, because I had a load-bearing beam above my new wall, I thought I might actually lift the wall up from the floor 1/4 to 1/2 inch or so in order to allow the vapor coming from underneath the DMX-1 to vent out into the adjacent room. To accomplish this, I fastened 4x6 by 3/4 inch pressure-treated slabs every 16 inches or so underneath the bottom plates of the new walls. This part of the job was actually a lot of fun. I used a Ramset 22 caliber single-shot tool to anchor the bottom plates of the new walls to the concrete. It's loaded with a gunpowder shot in one end and dry pins in the other. When you hit the top of the tool with the hammer, it causes the powder to go off, which in turn causes the pin to fire out the front, much like a bullet from a gun. And it's as loud as a gun too, so you should definitely wear ear protection and eye protection as well. Also, you should probably tell your housemates before you use it. Just saying. Anyway, I used the Ramset to drive pins through the bottom plates of the new walls, through the pressure-treated slabs, and into the concrete. With that being done, the new walls were anchored in, as strong as they could be, while also providing a venting mechanism for water vapor. With 2 new walls in place, it was time to install sheetrock. I ordered mold and mildew resistant drywall from Home Depot, rented a van for $20, and voluntold my daughter to assist in the pickup. What an angel, and pretty strong too. The sheetrock was installed with the long ends laid out horizontally, one on top of each other. I didn't bother cutting the sheets to fit perfectly as I thought I could install a stain trim for a more artistic look, and that's what I did. I fastened one layer of sheetrock on each side of the wall and decided not to put insulation inside the walls because I didn't need it for temperature control. And I'd learned that it wouldn't help with soundproofing either. Instead, I thought I might later put additional layers of drywall on the gym side of the wall, if and when I decided to work on soundproofing again. Next, it was time to finish the drywall. First, I had to tape over the joints between the sheets. That was easy enough. Next, I had to apply mud over the seams. It was pretty messy and I was a little frustrated, but I did well enough. Finally, after the mud had dried, I needed to sand it down so that the entire surface across the seams was smooth. This took a fair amount of time, but it came out fine as well. The last thing to design and build was the door frame. My design used the standard approach with king and jack studs installed vertically on each side of the door. The top plate of the door frame would be fastened directly to the soffit with screws, and I planned to use pressure-treated wood for the bottom plate, which would make contact with the concrete. Once again, if you were to use untreated wood, it would rot over time due to the moisture passing from the ground through the foundation and into the wood. I set the rough opening width on the door frame at 39 inches so that I could easily move large equipment into and out of the room. The height of this opening would be constrained to 80 inches because of the soffit. Unfortunately, I couldn't find a pre-hung door that had those dimensions, which meant I would have to design and build my own custom door jamb, the inner frame onto which the door's hinges and latch are mounted. Fortunately, all I had to do was encase the king and jack studs of the door frame with poplar. I then nailed a 1x1 strip around the inner sides of the door jamb as a doorstop. Next, I bought a standard slab door and used a handheld router to remove wood on the door jamb and the door itself for the hinges, and once again for the door latch. While I'm fairly comfortable with most power tools, routers are not my favorite. You really need to pay close attention to the direction of the bit's rotation. If you move the tool against the rotation, then it's possible for it to catch on the wood or even jump out of your cut. Like anything, it's a skill that develops with practice, and I had had zero experience with this tool before the build. Honestly, if I were to do this again, I think I'd probably just use a chisel. Yeah, it would take longer, but I'd be more comfortable with this simple tool. Better yet, get a pre-hung door. Compounding my lack of experience was my use of a plastic door latch and hinge template from Ryobi that was supposed to constrain the cuts I made. It didn't do a good job for me, so I removed it and completed the job freeform without a template guiding me. With all of that being said, I'm pretty happy with the way the hinges, doorknob, and latch came out. I'd recommend that you not do what I did if possible. Instead, do buy a pre-hung door. It'll save you a lot of time and stress. Well, that brings us to the end of another episode. I hope you enjoyed it and maybe learned something. My goal wasn't to provide an instructional video on how to use tools or anything like that, but more so to share the design problems I had to think through and how I solved them. And while I was more interested in getting this work done so that I could move on to recording and mixing, I really did enjoy the work. Before closing, I'd like to mention that I've included a few references to some great sources of information in the episode notes. Chief amongst them is anything from an American show called This Old House. It's a PBS show. Home music studios should be places where you want to spend a lot of time. In the next episode, I'll share with you what I did to create moods with my choice of room colors, lighting, and artwork. Until then, be well.